As a genre, JRPGs take place in a variety of settings. Well, yes and no actually. It seems that Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest set the fantasy trend early on, and the genre has pretty much just ran with it over the years. I mean, yeah, sometimes there's elements of other stuff like sci-fi or steampunk, but for the most part, the genre still largely stands rooted in fantasy. Sci-fi JRPGs are already rare enough, so JRPGs set in a modern setting, these barely even existed for the longest time. However, that was in the past though, and in recent years, I will say there has been a push towards the modern setting JRPG. They're most commonly set in Japan, and specifically Tokyo, but I will try to include some other locations just for variety's sake, even if it kinda stretches the term modern a little bit. So, without further ado, let's just get into it. Here's a list of 8 great JRPGs that take place in a modern setting. To start this list off, we have Yakuza Like a Dragon. This game is honestly the main reason why I even wanted to make this video. I was playing it again recently after taking some time off, and I was just like, damn, more people really need to play this. It's the first time the series went full traditional turn-based RPG, and God, it's just so good. If you're someone who's tired of 16-year-olds saving the world and all the tropes that come with it, and instead want a more mature story set in the real world with real, relatable dialogue between adults, then look no further. This is the game for you. While it can definitely still appeal to younger gamers and newcomers to the series, it's absolutely tailor-made for those who grew up with the genre, playing all the classics, and are now a little older. There's so many old-school JRPG references that you can just tell the devs are huge fans of Dragon Quest and stuff like that. The way they managed to incorporate so many stereotypical JRPG elements into a more modern setting is just so cleverly done. Honestly, I really just can't give this game enough praise. The voice acting is phenomenal, the story and the writing in general is excellent, the characters are all extremely likable and memorable, the depth of the battle system is surprisingly deep and complex, and yeah, I could keep going for a while. If you want to hear some more of my detailed thoughts on it, we did release a review over the game sometime last year, so check that one out if you're interested. Looking back, I feel like my voiceover kinda sucks, but it's fine. The content itself is good. What I'm saying at least still holds true. This was easily my favorite game of 2020, so if you haven't played this one yet, what are you waiting for? The second game we have on our list is Earthbound. Earthbound is probably the first modern setting JRPG that many of you think of, I'm sure. I mean, for the longest time, it pretty much was the only one. Excluding some of the Shin Megami Tensei games, of course, but a lot of those early ones we never got in the West. More on that series later, though. I guess technically, Earthbound isn't really modern anymore, considering it's set in like a fictionalized 1990s version of America, but it's close enough for this list at least, and I think people get the idea. Shit, there's ATMs, hotels, and yeah, it's modern enough. But yeah, the reputation of Earthbound pretty much precedes it by now. It's just a super charming, colorful, and incredibly wacky, over-the-top game. And I mean that last part in the best way. It's a game that never quite got the recognition it deserved when it was released, but has since become an absolute classic to fans over the years. It's not hard to see why, really. There's just so few games out there actually like it, and up until more recent years where some indie games have taken clear inspiration from it, like Undertale for example, you couldn't really get a tone or experience like this from any other game. Yeah, sure, the random encounters in some parts of the battle system maybe haven't aged the best these days, but the charming characters, story, and music absolutely have, making the world of Earthbound still worth exploring today. Check this one out if you haven't yet. Coming up next, we have both The World Ends With You Final Remix and its sequel, Neo The World Ends With You. Final Remix is an enhanced port of the original that came out on the DS, and Neo is the newest entry in the series released for the Switch. I'm including both here because Neo is a direct sequel to the first game, so it is recommended that you play that one first. Both games are set in the real-world location of Shibuya, Tokyo, and are just incredibly stylistic and flashy games. They have this really distinct art style that just oozes aesthetics. I definitely get some Persona 5 vibes with how stylized everything and all the menus are. Besides the presentation though, there's still a lot of other things to like about these games. The combat is super unique, the characters are dope, the soundtrack has some bangers, and yeah, it's just a fun game overall. If you're looking to dive into the vibrant streets of modern Shibuya, then check this series out. The next game we have on our list is Tokyo Xanadu EX+. Yup, another one set in Tokyo. I did say there was going to be a lot of these, and it's not the last one either. The EX Plus stands for the enhanced port with extra content that was later released. If I had to describe this game, I'd say it's like if you took some elements from Persona, the E series, and the Trails of Cold Steel series, and threw them into a blender, Tokyo Xanadu is the result you would get. The elements it takes from those games may not shine as much as it does in those titles, but they still come together to form a palatable and enjoyable enough combination. I mean, the game was created by Falcom, who created both the E series and the Trail series, so it only makes sense. If you've played any of those series before, you're gonna feel very at home here. The school setting is very Persona-esque, the combat has a lot in common with Ys, and all the skills and equipment customization feels very much like Trails. The story and characters can be a little tropey at times, but if you're someone who's into games like this in the first place, then you're probably gonna overlook some of these things anyway. If this game sounds like it's up your alley, then check it out. You'll probably like it. Coming up next, we have the Shadow Heart series. These games are definitely a bit of a stretch for the term modern, considering they take place in an alternate reality version of the early 1900s, but I didn't want this video just to include games based in Tokyo, so here we are. The first two games are directly connected and have you traversing across locations like Europe, Russia, China, and Japan. There's even fictionalized versions of real-life historical figures. These games have a pretty big Lovecraftian influence as well, and are almost horror games by nature, especially the first one. The second one does get a bit wackier. The third game is unrelated to the first two and takes place in more American and Native American locations. The tone is also completely different, as it's not dark at all. It's often considered the worst of the bunch actually, but it's still not a bad game. They all have really fun turn-based combat featuring the Judgment Ring, which adds an element of timing to your attacks. It's a great way to keep you engaged throughout these turn-based battles. Sadly, these games were only ever released on the PS2, making them a little hard to play these days, but if you're able to get a hold of them, they're well worth it. The next game we have on our list is Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth. Alright, I already know what some of you are thinking. Bruh, Digimon game? What is this? I know some people are anti-monster collecting games like Digimon and Pokemon as they feel they aren't true JRPGs, and for the most part they are correct, but in this case, Cyber Sleuth really does play out like a traditional JRPG, more so than any other Digimon game before it, as far as I know at least. I always thought Digimon was pretty cool in passing, but never really watched it growing up as I was more of a Pokemon guy. So yeah, I don't know shit about shit when it comes to the franchise. With that said, that didn't stop me from still having a lot of fun with this game. In fact, it might have even made it more fun in some ways actually, as that unknown aspect and the mystery of not knowing what some Digimon would digivolve into and shit was pretty compelling. Like I mentioned earlier, the actual combat plays out like a traditional turn-based JRPG where you fight with 3 Digimon at once, exploiting enemy weaknesses based on your Digimon type. It's a lot of fun. Setting-wise, the game takes place in real-life locations throughout Tokyo, and the scene is pretty accurate. As someone who's been there before and is yearning to go back soon, it made me quite nostalgic. But yeah, while the game can get a little repetitive at times, and regardless if you're a Digimon fan or not, there's still a fun enough experience to be had here. It might just surprise some of you. Check it out. Coming up next on our list, we have Tokyo Mirage Sessions FE Encore. This version on the Switch is an enhanced port of the original release on the Wii U with extra content. Tokyo Mirage Sessions is a crossover between the Shin Megami Tensei franchise and the Fire Emblem series. As you can tell by the footage, this one also takes place in modern-day Tokyo, and with its heavy focus on pop idols, makes it probably the weebiest one of them all. If that's not your thing, that does make this game a bit of a harder sell, but there still are some other aspects to like about it. The environments are just really pretty, and the battles are a lot of fun. They feature elements from both franchises, like the weapon triangle system from Fire Emblem and the enemy weaknesses from Shin Megami Tensei, and they're probably the best part about this game in my opinion. Tokyo Mirage Sessions may not be the type of game that appeals to everyone, but to the ones that it does, there's a good time to be had here. Speaking of Shin Megami Tensei though, to finish off this list, we have the entire Shin Megami Tensei franchise. A lot of these games take place in modern day Japan and could apply here, so I figured I would just include it as a whole. The Persona sub-series is probably the most popular set of games in this franchise, but unless you've been living under a rock JRPG-wise, you've probably heard of them already. In case you haven't though, here's a very brief rundown. Persona 1 is pretty dated by today's standards. Persona 2 sort of is as well, but it did improve upon the first a lot and was split up into 2 different games actually, and Persona 3 through 5 pretty much transformed the series entirely with its social aspects. These are often considered the best in the series, and depending on who you ask, you'll get a different answer for which one they consider the absolute best. With that said, Persona 5 is easily the most accessible, so if you're a newcomer to the series, I would start with that one. If you like it, you can dive into some of the older games from there. The mainline Shin Megami Tensei games often take place in Tokyo as well, but they're usually more post-apocalyptic and not really as fitting here. Some titles that are really fitting here though are the Devil Survivor games. These games take place in modern Tokyo, big surprise there, and play out more like a tactical strategy RPG, similar to games like Fire Emblem and Final Fantasy Tactics. The classic element weakness system is still here though, on top of the demon fusion system which the franchise is known and loved for. It's just a really fun battle system overall, and it's pretty challenging too. I mean, most SMT games are fairly difficult, so it's right in line with that. But yeah, this is a set of games that doesn't get as much love as some of the other SMT titles, which is kind of a shame. It's also a shame these games are only available on the DS and 3DS, but who knows, maybe they'll get a Switch port one day. Regardless, they're still well-made games, and well worth playing today. Same with the SMT franchise as a whole, really. There's many classic titles to dive into, so check them out. Alright, and that about wraps up this video. Thanks for watching everyone, we hope you enjoyed it. If you did, it would mean a lot if you could either hit that like button, or even consider subscribing to the channel. We put out new JRPG content pretty much every week. What are some other modern setting JRPGs that you guys like that I didn't list here? Let us know in the comments below. Games like Persona 5 are really amazing, but yeah, most people have already heard about it, so my biggest takeaway with this video is please play Yakuza Like a Dragon. It's so damn good and deserves way more attention than it got when it was released. As always, just want to give a huge thanks to our Patreon supporters. You guys are the best. Your generosity is much appreciated. Other than that, thanks again for watching everyone, and hope you have an awesome day. This is Gaming Productions. Until next time.